what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Ex Nihilo podcast. It's me, Eddie. This podcast is really about doing a few things. It's about creating three things in you, I think. It's about helping you pursue a good well-being with your body, connecting the mind, body, and spirit. It's really about longevity, helping you live a long time, but it's also about performance and actually feeling really good. And I think our next guest is going to help us do all three in a varying number of ways. So I've got with me a friend of mine, Pastor Alex Early. Alex is a pastor at Redemption, a church in Seattle. But most importantly, and really the topic for today, is he just wrote a book that is this sort of awesome combination of theology, but also a cookbook, which is just something if you're a listener to this show, you know that's near and dear to my heart, but it's also near and dear to his, and he's a fantastic representation of that. The book's called Among the Pots and Pans: Connect with God, Love Your Neighbor, and Nourish Your Community Through the Art of Cooking. Alex, thanks for jumping on with me, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
So I got to know right off the front, what moved you to write a book combining two of your favorite things, theology and cooking?
Yeah, they're because they're my two favorite things, I guess.
Of course.
You know, gosh, I got into cooking right when I got into church planting and pastoring, honestly, because I found very quickly, just like you, all of my work has to do with my words, reading words and writing words and speaking words, and like most importantly, like listening to people's words.
Yeah.
And so it's a language based occupation that we have, and I recognized probably the first week in the parish, like right out of the gate, I need to work with my hands somehow. I need to do creative work with my hands. And so having a young family, I'm trying to figure out, what will I do? It's like, do I want to play golf? Like, well, golf is fine, I guess, but that's just going to take me away from my family for hours.
Yeah.
I can play music, but that I can go start a band, but I'm away from my family there.
Yeah.
I like to paint, but that I do that alone. So it's like, okay. So as I was thinking it through, like, I've got to do something creative with my hands. The kitchen became kind of the most obvious place. I can do creative work with my hands that doesn't take me away from my friends and family, but rather brings friends and family in closer. And so it kind of, between doing the theology stuff and, being a pastor, and now it's going to bring everybody else in, it gave that creative space to do both at the same time. So that's kind of how I came into this world of both cooking and theology.
Yeah, too. And so you find something that keeps you close to the wife and kids. You're able to, it's a creative outlet to get your mind off of all of the books and the conversations. But you could have done anything, man. I mean, you could have worked on cars. You could have,
I thought of a lot of stuff.
You could have been a green thumb. You could have been a gardener. I had a friend that said he, because of what basically what you just said, of all the conversations that are happening, it's like, I just decided I'm going to become really good at electrician. I'm going to be an electrician because it's simple. I wire the house. It makes sense. It's not convoluted. But cooking is something that's different because we all eat. We eat every single day. And some of us, like, we could eat good food and we could eat food that tastes horrible. What was it specifically, though, about food that made you say, I think I want to go deeper into cooking?
It had to do with, like, my relationships that were happening in the kitchen. Like, not just with Jana and the kids, but like my friends, especially my friend John, that really started showing me the ropes early on in cooking. He was the one that really was like, dude, come cook with me this Friday. I was like, okay. Yeah. And he's not a trained chef, but man, he is amazing. He is amazing. Yeah. So we found ourselves just enjoying Friday afternoons. Like, we'd clock out of work early and like go to the tienda around the corner from where we lived. And like, we would just go into this little Mexican market, buy everything we needed. And then we would just go and like spend the afternoon and turn up music and just hang and like come up with things together. And that's really where the magic began to happen. It was like, I'm having fun with my friends, and then we could start bringing more friends into the picture, and like
Mhm.
this. And so it just became this like natural community building thing. Like you're saying, everybody's going to eat today anyway.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
let's do this with a
Yeah.
little more purpose to it, I guess, you know?
Would you say I've heard people say cooking is I want to know your thoughts on this. Cooking is more art and baking is more science. Do you
Oh,
agree?
100%.
Disagree?
Yes, I suck as a baker.
Isn't that weird how that works?
I'm the worst baker in the world. I mean, I can pull off pizza really great. And there's some pizzas in the cookbook, but like,
Mhm.
and like cornbread, you know. So there's
Yeah.
like a few things like I can bake, but yes, that's definitely it. Baking's a science and the rest is art.
It
Yeah.
it's weird how that works. And I'm from the Bay Area, and
Uh,
sourdough bread's obviously a massive thing, but I just find that so bizarre how I can't get that sourdough bread that's there in other places because of the climate. I think
mhm.
is there is that science for
Mhm.
us and art for God?
Yeah, there you go.
Um, because that sucks. Because I just want a nice, just giant, delicious, ancient grain sourdough bread loaf.
So perfect.
Why
Yeah,
can't I get one?
you can't. The climate
Yeah.
doesn't work with you. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's merge some of the theology in this conversation. Some of the biggest parts of the Bible
Hmm.
center around these meals, right? So we've got, we obviously got like the manna in
Hmm.
we've got Adam and Eve in the garden. You write about this in the book. You
Hmm.
get we've got Passover, we've got, all these the wedding supper of the lamb. There's all these massive thematic parts of scripture that are centered around meals. Why do you think that is? What do you think God's trying to tell us as readers?
Hmm. Man. Yeah. Why is it
Big
that way?
question.
That is a big question. Yeah. Why is it that
I can
way?
ponder with you too, of
Yeah, we can
course.
rip out loud on this one. Um, like there's an interesting psalm where God is like being rhetorical with, the people of Israel. And he says, like, if I were hungry, I would never tell you. Like, if I would ever get hungry. But because I have no needs, and because I don't get tired and I don't get hungry. But if let's say if I did get hungry, you'd be the last to find out. Like, and I think with food, it so clearly communicates to us every few hours, or for some of us even less than a few hours. Like our
Yeah.
stomachs let us know I'm a dependent being, and I'm in
Mhm.
incredible need, and I'm dependent upon my neighbors. You know, to 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 grow, to harvest, to package, to bring things to a like it create like we're so overwhelmingly dependent on one another
Yes.
because of food. And so one it signals to us our createdness and our need and our dependency. Um and I think
Beautiful.
it's through the table where God God has just chosen to tell us his stories through the table, because you don't need a PhD to understand God's stories. He
Mm.
decides to tell a story that literally anyone at any age can understand, and that's always around a table. It's universal. So you don't have to be born at a certain place at a certain time and speak a certain language in order for God to get through to you. He can get through to you by the very thing you need most, which is
Wow.
something to eat. And that's
Yes.
everybody. And so it's God's like creative genius at work, you know,
Mhm.
in relating to his
Yeah.
creation.
Yeah. It sure is, man. It's beautiful how it works, and I love what you're talking about as it relates to dependence, because you're thinking about God creating Adam and Eve in the very beginning, and yeah, you can eat of any of these trees in the garden. Like what a beautiful, like, hey, like before sin enters the world,
Yeah.
there's an element of dependence, a significant element of dependence. Like I'm providing for you, and unironically, through the garden and through a meal, sin comes into the world. And that's like not an insignificant factor in all of this, right? Because all of these, and God's redemption is throughout other meals, or at least centered around other meals too. So, what do you make of the fruit in the garden that Adam and Eve ate that brings sin into the world? Like, why a
Yeah.
fruit, man?
Yeah. Why fruit also? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I could pass on fruit. I feel like I would have passed that test. Like tacos, I would have broke.
No doubt. Like we're done. Tacos al pastor.
Yeah,
We're all biting it. Yeah.
I'm gone. Yeah, but like, I don't. When I think about it, well, the story is basically telling you something to the effect of God's withholding something from you. That's the big
Mhm.
idea with the serpent right there, right? Where he's like, hey, God doesn't want you to eat this because dot dot dot.
Right.
God's withholding. And so there's something about the lure of going, well, I want to be God in that sense. Like there's nothing in all of creation that I'm not entitled to.
Mm.
And that's kind of where we fall through. And I suppose it communicates so clearly, that story communicates clearly because again, it's something we all do every day. We've all tasted something that we loved and enjoyed, and it nourished us in a sense. And right. And so I think it communicates the deceptive nature of how sin broke in was that it was promising to satisfy something in you, but it wasn't in, but not that apple in particular, not that fruit
Mhm.
in particular. That one was not intended to satisfy. So
Wow.
I think that's kind of where my
That's
mind drifts
I
first.
think I think that's a really good observation. I mean, you have a really awesome way of stating these really profound things in a
Great.
like a in like it's like you just drop it like, oh, like I just thought of this, but bang, like that's a really big deal what you just
Yeah.
said. So we've got this sort of state of dependence
Hmm.
that God created us in, where we're dependent on God, we're in great relationship with God, He's providing our meals, and it's through this other meal where we partake of this dotness where it's like, hey, you could be something more, something else. Maybe there's a state of independence that awaits you. And
That's
it's ironic, through a meal, not an apple of your own, or not a fruit of our own creation, ironically enough, but a fruit of God's creation that we partake of it. And we kind of find out, hey, we're actually really not that independent. We kind of do need
neat.
God anyway, even despite eating this fruit. And that's just like it's a rude awakening and a sad awakening, and one that we're still all kind of pondering and figuring out how deep the rabbit hole goes. I mean, no one really deeply and truly understands like the ramifications of Genesis chapter 3. It's absolutely fascinating how that works. And then, so then we've kind of fast forward and we get like this redemption story, right? We get like the Passover,
Yep.
and we get and so I'm curious to know what do you eat the Seder meal? Have you ever
I have.
partaken of the Seder meal?
Yeah,
What
yeah,
are
I
your
have.
thoughts? What are your thoughts on the Seder meal in terms of yeah, yeah? Well, you like it? Is it tasty?
Can be. It depends on who's
Yeah,
cooking.
yeah, yeah.
I've had it where it was done very poorly. I can tell you
Oh yeah.
that much, and it wasn't that great. But
well,
you know,
well, the bitter herbs. I mean,
that's
salt
kind of
water.
the, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That's
So,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah. So when I think like God starts to tell another, like his redemption story, he's going to speak to it through another meal, which is so I think that's incredible that, with the Passover lamb being sacrificed. And, if you go back and like kind of read through Exodus or go read, like, especially like over in Ezekiel, he unpacks a bit more that was
Hmm.
actually going on in Egypt at the time, where essentially the Israelites were just as guilty as the Egyptians of
Yeah.
sin. And they had begun to get into all kinds of stuff. And so
Yeah.
it's not like the Israelites are the good guys and the Hebrew people are the good guys and the Egyptians are the bad guys. And so God's just going to come after the bad guys and set the good guys free. It's like actually God's children got tangled up in the same kinds of sin. And so therefore the only ones that were going to go free were going to go free through a blood sacrifice,
Wow.
and it's like, oh, so that's where this is coming from first.
Yeah.
Otherwise, all of the Hebrew children would have been wiped out too, on the
Yeah.
night of the Passover. But and
Right.
so Exodus 12 says, when I see the blood on the doorframe, I will then pass over your sins. And so, or pass over you. And so it is amazing that there is a lamb that is slaughtered. in the place of the people's sin that then covers their home. Like, oh my gosh, like the whole gospel's like right there in the second book of the Bible, you know?
Yeah, I know.
And then he's like, and you get to eat this meal too,
Mhm.
you know? And so
It's
not
wonderful.
only, oh, go ahead. Yeah, yeah.
No, I was just to say it's wonderful. I mean, it's almost like God sort of doubling down. I mean, it's in a very different way, and it's more than this. But if along the lines of meals, there's a sense in which God is sort of doubling down on our need for dependence.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so while it's not just food and sustenance for like literally being alive, but spiritual vitality,
Yep.
um, through the Passover, through the Passover Lamb of Christ, you
Yes.
have this legitimate saying, no, no, you are dependent and see. And maybe at this point you're not capable of earning your own, you're capable of being independent, but
Mm,
I'm going to die for your ability to be reunited to me and remain dependent with me.
yeah, that's
And
it.
it is through sort of a meal he's teaching us that, which is just like the kindness of God. Like I wonder the number of ways he could have taught the Israelites that lesson, and by extension us, but he chooses this way. I think
Yeah.
it's a very it's not accident. There's some
No, no.
intelligent design going on here.
Yeah, yeah. And then he also like says, and I want you to do this every year.
Yeah.
Like keep celebrating this meal every year
Mhm.
after you are set free from slavery and bondage. I want you to repeatedly come back to this meal and remember this day. And when your kids ask, why are we doing this holiday? What's all this about? He's like, I want you to tell them the story about how you were enslaved and I set you free, and like it's just
Yeah.
amazing that God set it up, not just in like read a book, which would have
Hmm.
been totally fine,
Yeah, he could
but
have.
or tell the story, which is part of it. But he says, I want you to eat a meal too. I want you to take the time to prepare this specific menu and remember this specific story over and over and over and over and over. It's it's
Wow.
beautiful.
Yeah, you're right. It could have been a book. It could have been
Yeah,
it could have been a golden tablets in a hat,
totally.
whatever it is. It could have been all so number of different things. But instead it's like a ceremonial, it's a celebration every single year to say, remember what God did in reminding of us our dependence upon him, rescuing us from slavery,
Yep.
freeing us from the bondage, eventually from the bondage of not just Egyptian captivity, but slavery
Mhm.
and sin. Like, wow, what a God to invite us into an annual moment of celebration. But speaking of celebration, like food, like can you truly celebrate without food around? Like,
I don't.
is
I
that
mean, I
even
can't think
possible?
of anything I've ever been to that was fun where food wasn't really involved.
Not a
Like,
chance, right?
yeah, like I'm gonna go to a show tonight. And before we go to the show, we're gonna go out to eat with our friends. Like, you always do that, or every wedding. Like,
Food.
yeah, man. Even in the saddest moments at a funeral,
Yeah. There's always a jello at a funeral,
always a
afterwards.
Jello.
There's always something. Yeah.
You have to be an especially terrible sinner for someone to serve Jello at your funeral.
Oh man. Can you imagine? I sure hope my wife figures out how to.
Actually, I am a sucker for Jello. I will eat Jello, no problem.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but it is. You're right. It is basically at everything that you're
Mhm,
celebrating. You know.
mhm. Yeah, and God's, I mean, again, continuing the theme, right? So, um, of dependence, you've got manna, right, coming out of the Exodus. You've got God providing Israel relying on Yahweh for 6 meals, 7 meals,
Mhm.
6 deliverances of these meals,
Mhm.
and you see like, oh man, we really can't do a lot. We can't go very far without eating. We literally die.
Yes.
And we take that for granted, but like literally, like how powerful are you, human being, that you literally can't, you'll just die in a week if you don't
Just
even put something I've created in your mouth.
isn't that crazy?
Like,
It's that we are that dependent, and I think you know we forget that really quickly. Like we really do. Um,
mhm.
and yet, if you miss lunch today, you find out real quick.
Yeah,
Like I worked
you're
through lunch.
cranky. Yeah.
Yeah. You go home and everybody's like, "What's wrong with dad?" It's
Yeah.
like
He's like literally breaking down until like 5:30, you
over
know,
one sandwich,
one missed meal.
completely thrown. Yeah, Yeah.
I think it's important for the listeners to kind of grasp this concept. So like it feels like big and theological, but it's like God being a good dad teaching us the simple things. Like, hey, you're made in my image, and you're created to be interdependent with one another and dependent, not necessarily independent of me. And the little things in his kindness teach us that, like, hey, breakfast, lunch, and dinner,
Yep.
water, like
Yep.
little things. And not only that, the dependence on God could be a celebration. It could be a birthday party or a wedding or even a funeral where you're gathering for a meal
Yep.
and building friendships and remembrance. And so we're kind of like looking back and remembering our dependence. So the manna is like a kind of a cool story that builds upon that.
Yeah. It keeps telling you just how dependent we are. That's it.
Mhm.
That's it. You have to
Yeah.
go to the grocery every day or every week. You have to go. And that the grocery store reminds you as you walk in, and you can see just as far as your eye can see all the produce
Yeah.
that people like us are allowed to buy as much of it as we want. Like, the fact is
Yeah.
you walk in and go, I I can't live without this. And that's what Jesus really drives on later in the Gospels, where he's like, you don't actually live by bread alone.
Yeah.
Like, there's something even more significant going on in this world than the grocery store. Like, that I'm here to satisfy. But there is the daily reminder,
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
of our
Come on.
creator.
Come on.
Come
And
on.
let's talk about communion for a bit.
Yeah.
So how does communion build upon this theme in your mind?
Yeah. When I, without going down a thousand theological roads surrounding communion, Eucharist, Lord's table, whatever the listeners call it.
Hmm.
Um, One thing that all Christians can completely agree on is that in communion, with the bread and the wine representing the sacrifice of Jesus, that is that's the place where we're reminded that you're essentially renewing your marriage vows,
Mm,
in a sense. Like, I think that's what's ultimately getting at us at that table every time
right.
we go to it, is we're remembering we're the ones with open hands, again, in the dependent posture
Mm,
of, I'm in need here. Like, I'm not my own savior. I don't have all the answers. I'm not sufficient in and of myself. Like, you're just confessing the poverty of spirit that's within all of us, and the table is sitting there going, and I'm here to meet all of your needs and have met your needs and will continue to provide. And so, yeah, I think that just tracks with the same theme of dependence throughout.
that's wonderful. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's beautiful too. And like we at our church, we do it weekly. I don't know what you guys are doing
Same.
over at Redemption. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's an awesome opportunity for that remembrance, to remember the dependence. What is God?
Mhm.
What can we leave at the tables that God has
Mhm.
freed us from? And
Yeah.
how can we look back to what God has done? Where as a church, we're going through Exodus right now, which is really
Oh, that's
cool and
awesome.
timely for our conversation. But it's always it's always like everyone I've ever known that's taught through that book has always come back saying, like, I can't believe how much I've grown deeply in my faith and how tired I am at the same time trying to like go through it.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yep.
just the thematic, the progression of this dependence theme is so there, and then you see it kind of like play itself out in the New Testament with Jesus in the Eucharist, or whatever, the communion. It's just passionate. What about the last meals? What about the meals in heaven? What about the wedding supper of the Lamb? Like, what do you make of that celebration? Is that a still a dependence? And then like, what's on the table, man? Like, what are we eating?
I don't I don't know. I am
Yeah.
so looking forward to this. Like, um, you know, most theologians kind of tie like Isaiah, and his references, Isaiah 60, talking about like the choicest meats and the finest wines and this and that, like when Zion is just glowing and we are there at the table. It When I think about that scene now, especially in post 2020,
Mhm.
post everything since the fall of man, but like since
Yeah.
2020, most
Yeah.
recently, like when we think about like so much division and hatred and violence that is swept through like just our country alone, much less the world, this table that is promised that God will accomplish in the same way that he made the sun come up today, that is going to happen.
Wow.
And that table will be filled with people from all over the globe throughout time. And I can only imagine that their own native cuisines are going to be represented there. I really
Yeah.
don't expect it to all be like Chick-fil-A or whatever.
Oh
Like,
boy.
God, I hope not. But like, I
Hopefully.
mean, my son would be thrilled. Like this is
Yeah.
great. But
No
like,
doubt.
truly, I do think what you'll end up seeing is cuisine represented from all over the world, showing God's brilliant tapestry of what he was after all along,
Yeah.
um, with variety and difference, um, and I
I
think that
imagine. Yeah.
profoundly.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I think that does speak like profoundly to a day and an age like ours where there is so much division. Are you a Republican? Are you a Democrat? Are you this or that? And all the millions of ways in which we try to divide ourselves from one another and better ourselves than somebody else and all this stuff. Like this table, both at communion and the points to that table on the last day, it says all those walls have been effectively destroyed through the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. The first table tells us that. And it says, and there's another table where we're actually going to finally lay down all of our divisions and have
Wow.
a meal together. And we're going to not eat in silence and grumpy and making faces at one another. You're going to sit down with the same people that Jesus gave his life for, just like he gave his life for you. And you'll raise your glass to the king. It's like
Yeah.
this is what this is all about the king that made it all right. And it'll
Wow.
fix everything we broke in the garden. And
Yes.
that's that's what I mean. The joy of it is, yes, sure, the food is going to be awesome. But the point of heaven, is not like pearly gates and streets of gold. Like if you show up in heaven and it's a pearly gate and a street of gold and Jesus isn't there, you might be in hell. That's the thing. It's like that's not you know what I'm saying? So
Yes.
so
Well, I
that's it.
love that.
Yeah.
Well, the food will point to Jesus. Like
Totally.
it won't be about the food. It will it
Mhm.
will only magnify the glory of God, and it
Yeah.
will be a wonderful representation of what was always intended to be. Was
Yes.
this element that we could partake of in worship
Mhm.
and enjoy the king for who he is, instead of this like, oh, look what I did and I'm now independent from you. It's
Yep.
this like, oh man, like how great is God that we have this. I gotta imagine though, if I was gonna speculate, there would be a little bit of there'd be some fusions we haven't yet thought of. Like, you know what I'm saying? I'm talking about let's bring in some
Mhm.
we've got all sorts of stuff
Like
coming in because it's
like
not just gonna be like grandmama's Thanksgiving
no, 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 no,
turkey
no,
and plain potatoes, man.
no. We're gonna do some Mexican Korean fusion and it's gonna be
It's gonna be
out of control.
unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not gonna have any genetically modified God doesn't need a GMO
He
anything. Like
doesn't
he
need
already
it.
created it perfect.
It's gonna be
He's good to
fine.
go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's gonna be perfect. You know,
Yeah.
like I read something yesterday online that says every time you've experienced happiness, that is essentially a signpost of saying what's to come. And it's like a
Wow.
whisper. It was basically the person was trying to say something to the effect of every time you've been happy in this life, and you could insert eating a great meal there. Every time that's basically a lowercase h happy. That's
Wow.
pointing to the capital H happy that you're going to experience
Come
on
on.
that day. And it's like, yeah, it's amazing when you think about all the amazing meals you've had and all the times you've been happy in your life,
Mm,
going, gosh, we have no idea what we're in for. That's the
come
thing.
on.
And that's why it's worth living for Jesus. And that's why it's worth inviting everybody else to your table. Because
That's right.
what's on the horizon, we don't we don't have a mind to get we can't get our mind around
Well, food does something to us. It's
that.
able to. It's a lot like sports in some ways. Like I know I'm a sports guy, so forgive me,
Hmm.
but it's nice to. It's a nice analogy in that it transcends so many boundaries that we set up that are arbitrary, socioeconomic,
Oh
race,
yeah.
culture, and food all of a sudden opens us up to like the possibilities, like what we've been missing. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why I think food is such an invaluable tool for community and relationship building. Like, like you mentioned, these tribes, tongues, nations coming together, sort of the reversal of the Tower of Babel, sort of happening at
Totally.
at a table where people are coming back together and being able to communicate with one another and loving on one another. Do you
Yeah.
think that's like one of the primary reasons why meals are such powerful tools for building community and relationships? I mean, it's
Yeah.
in the title of your book, so I imagine you know a lot about this.
Yeah. It definitely. Yeah. It is it. It is it. Like it. That's really cool to think about. Like yeah, in relation to sports too. Like
Mm,
it. Your socioeconomic standing doesn't matter on that field. Like
yeah,
when you come to play, we're here to play. And
yeah,
like the table is also like that too,
mhm,
in the sense of yeah, how relationships are formed. Um, I think it's because because you have a common interest and you're enjoying something together. Um,
yeah,
like so for me, like after writing this, um, it opened the doors for me to start getting to talk to lots of my friends that
right,
know I'm a follower of Jesus, but it's actually opened the doors to talk a bit more about Jesus with them,
mhm,
um, because of that common interest. First in food, that we can both agree how to cook a steak. We
yeah,
both agree that this is fun and this is terrible. Like we've got so much in common already that it then bridges that gap to go, yeah, we can actually move into talking about some other stuff too,
yeah. That's really good.
which has been
Yeah,
really cool.
that's really cool, man. So you're able to build relationships with people. So like that's my point, right? It's like,
Mm.
man, you're a pastor, I'm a pastor. There's people that would never walk through the doors of my church. And I'm like, hey man, well, you want to come to the church, hear me preach? They're like, what? But if I'm like, hey, will you come over for dinner? They're like, I mean, they might go, no one's really invited me over for dinner, but maybe I'll come to your barbecue or whatever. Yeah, yeah, sure. Like when I was living in San Francisco, we had a guy, a friend of ours who was at our CrossFit gym together, and we were working out, him and his wife and their little baby. And we invited him over for dinner. He's a Jewish guy married to a Korean girl. We invite him over, and we're after dinner, we're hanging out in the living room, and he says, you know what? I've been in San Francisco 9 years, and this is the first time I've ever been in someone else's living room.
Whoa.
And I just thought,
Hmm.
wow, like what? First of all, like that's sad, right? Like what, that someone has never really been invited over someone's house. But think about like what food's able to do. A Jewish guy, not really practicing not really practicing Jew, doesn't want to go to church, but is willing to come over and have like conversations about connection because I can make brisket.
There
Like,
you go.
and brisket's the gateway. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
it worked. And so to be able to see that happen and it play itself out that way, now I have the door open for conversation that
There you go.
I don't know if he became a Christian. I love to tell you he did, but I love to think
Mm.
that over the course of the months we spent together that he heard about Jesus. He knew that I was a pastor and he heard the gospel, but he
Yep.
also knew like, hey man, I don't know about this Jesus guy, but I know that Eddie's doing good work. And if there's something about
Mm.
that that lends him to be that way, then maybe I want to know more. Like I
There
hope
you
that
go.
happens.
There you go. I mean, yeah, and especially like in our city and society now,
Mhm.
like one thing that stands out to me in Seattle is like hospitality is perhaps the strongest apologetic for the gospel. Like
Yes.
no one asks me about the ontological, teleological, epistemological, cosmological arguments for the existence of God.
That's
Nobody.
right.
Literally
Yes.
nobody's asking. And that's okay. I mean, I still
Come
like that.
on.
But what does speak to people in a cancel culture or a inhospitable culture is people opening up their homes and not just say, come to my Christian event at church.
Yes.
Like you're saying, like, I, I actually don't invite my unbelieving friends to church first. I invite them to my house.
Yeah.
Like, I want you to hang out with me and my wife and my kids and my other neighbors, my friends. Like,
Hmm.
and we can get to the church conversation, and
Yeah.
that's just been my approach. But like, my friends are more likely to be interested in other things, having first been welcome to my table, not
Mm.
something else, So,
Yes.
and then going to church together later tends to translate a bit more and go, oh, that thing I heard them talking about in the kitchen, that's what this is here. Like, they see it,
Mm.
you know. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, in the dinner when you're at a dinner table with someone, you can see. I think it's just. I mean, it makes intuitive sense, but for whatever reason, like American evangelicalism has like got this weird machine going, and it's got it all backwards. But like, hey, if you're walking the walk, it makes sense that when people hear what the talk is, they're more apt to believe it. Like it's like, hey, like
Totally.
I truly want to spend more time with you. I truly want to get to know you. I truly want to be friends with you. I truly want to cook a meal for you, and I
Totally.
truly do it because I love Jesus. Like I
Totally.
truly do, instead of going like, hey, come hear about Jesus first, you don't know anything about me. It's like, did that work? Did you change?
Does that
And
work?
it's just like, well, like why would I want to be like, I don't know, I feel swindled at that point, you know what I'm saying?
Totally. It feels, because you are being swindled. That's what it feels like. It's like, that's such a backwards way to go about this,
Totally.
versus a simple life of hospitality and enjoying Jesus in front of your unbelieving friends.
Yeah.
Like, that's the thing. Like, I'm gonna bring Jesus up at my house, on a walk, in the gym, certainly at church too. Like, I'm gonna
Yeah.
bring Jesus up everywhere. He's the source.
Come
Like,
on.
he's just gonna come up, whether I'm talking to a fellow pastor or to whatever, a barista, around the corner. Like, he's probably gonna come up. It's just kind of what I'm about.
Yeah, for
And he
sure.
does this to people. And so, yeah, I think, yeah, that's how this works. So, and it feels so much less swindly.
Well, it's inauthentic, right? Like it's at times it can feel really inauthentic,
Mhm.
but I think if you're in the kitchen, you're the one doing the cooking, you're the one having conversations, that you're being a normal person,
Mhm.
and Jesus flows out of you because that's who you are and who you worship, and people can just experience the authenticity.
There you
People
go.
are hungry for that. But speaking of being in the kitchen, I
Yeah.
mean, it's not just about eating good food. It's about, for your book's about cooking the food.
Yeah.
Um, what is it about cooking that could feel like, I don't know, is cooking an act of worship? Can it be an act of
Oh, yeah.
worship? And
Yeah.
and and how is it that in your
That's
mind?
that's a great question. For me, like I said earlier, like, I got into cooking because I was looking for a creative outlet, to work with my hands and so on. And I realized fairly quickly, um, that, yeah, we've got a ragu on the stove and this and that is cooking. And then suddenly it's like, oh my gosh, Jesus is here too.
Mm,
Like, and I'm not playing. Like, Jesus does not stay at the communion table at church. He says, I'm with you always to the end of the age. I'm going with you everywhere. And Jesus is present with us in our mundane moments, and not just the moments where you're at some worship service or reading your Bible or whatever, but Jesus is present to Christians always through the person of the Holy Spirit. And so I began to learn, as I'm like cooking or cleaning up or whatever I'm doing, that this is actually an old tradition, that a lot of saints have actually walked down these roads. Like, I was
yeah.
like, "Oh, wow, I'm sitting here cooking, I'm processing something I read earlier. Sometimes I'm praying for a friend or maybe somebody in my family or whatever. I'm just like thinking, and I'm just doing something, working with my hands, and it becomes a place of worship.
Yeah.
Like, and there's several saints, like, down through the ages, like Brother Lawrence, that wrote the book Practice of the Presence of God.
Oh
He was a
yeah.
cook. He was a cook, and
That's cool.
he said something to the effect of, um, "I'm no more nearer to God in my kitchen with all the pans clanging and clattering and people calling for me than I am at the communion table." He's like,
Wow.
"They're both fine. I can be with God in both places." Like, wow,
I
that's
love that.
amazing. Um, yeah, Saint San Pascal said the same thing. Spain, you know, Saint Teresa of Avila said the same
Hmm.
thing. You know, she was the one that said the phrase "among the pots and pans." She was the one that was communicating to her students, saying, "God is with you in the kitchen. God walks
That's
among the pots and
wow.
pans." And it's like, so God is actually with average people doing average things every single day. This God of ours has
That's
accommodated
beautiful.
himself to our domestic life. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, we're not just figuring something novel out like in the last 30 years of like after the Food Network got invented, we're all like, oh, it turns out you could worship God while you cook. You know what I mean? Like Guy Fieri didn't figure this out, right? Like this.
He definitely did.
I don't know if Guy Fieri knows where he is half the
Yeah,
time.
I don't either, but yeah, I'll just leave it at
Um,
that. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. I think that dude, you said that that was really well put. You can be with God. I'm no more closer to God. I mean, you're obviously quoting as a brother Lawrence there, but I'm more closer to God taking communion than I am in the kitchen. That
Yeah.
that literally means that, man, everything we do can be a wonderful act of worship.
Yes.
But I think the food element and the dependence theme that we've been talking about, and it's like not only am I dependent on God for this food, but I get to be creative like God. I'm a culture maker. I'm
Yes.
cultivating. I have dominion, and I get to
Yes.
act out my imago Deyness by crafting something wonderful and
That's
then
it.
enjoying and feeding me and my family with it. It's like this like
Mhm.
wonderful, beautiful liturgical act
That's it.
of dependence and worship with God. Like beautiful, beautiful. It's
It's
almost like God meant this to happen, right?
yes, that's exactly it. You know, there's
Yes.
something too, like you were just saying a minute, like you reminded me with the dominion thing, you know, and exercising dominion, and there's like, um, and there's a page or two in the book about men in particular in the kitchen and how
Mm,
there is a resurgence of men going into the kitchen, that it's no longer just for mom to take care of. And the reason being is that because in a day of like Uber Eats and fast food everything, where food is always so convenient or we eat very rushed, um,
yes.
kind of things, um, there's something really deeply satisfying that men are finding in the kitchen by literally, we say it like when you go to work every day, like to put food on the table. Like
Mhm.
the idea is that men are starting to find like this is actually, it's primal, it's wired within us, like to literally put food on the table for our families. And so that's something that's also been pretty interesting in this whole experiment or experience that I've had in the kitchen, is
Mhm.
like there is something really amazing. Last night I made butter chicken and naan bread and all this stuff for like my wife and kids, and like
Yeah.
putting the food on the table was a that's a satisfying experience in a world where, especially for so many of us men, like our work never feels finished.
Ooh.
And so nothing's ever done at work. There's always another project. There's something else to finish, another email to send, whatever. And there's something really satisfying about finishing cooking a meal, putting the meal on the table, enjoying that meal with your family. And then everybody cleans up together and going, okay, I might not have finished everything at the office today, um,
Mhm.
but this is finished and this is awesome.
Wow.
You know?
That's beautiful. I think men listening to this, man, you got to get that in your head. I mean,
Mhm.
it's not just about going out making the money, sort of
Yeah.
that sort of sort of a quintessential stereotypical vision of
Yeah.
wife's got the apron on.
Right.
Certainly moms can cook too, but there is
Definitely.
a really awesome thing about being a father and placing this meal before your family, facilitating a conversation and taking responsibility to build fellowship with your children and your wife at the
That's it.
table and seeing their faces light up and going, we're making memories together, we're enjoying one another's presence. And so my son and my daughters, they're going to pass this on to their
Yeah.
families. That's beautiful, and that's godliness in
Yes.
action.
And you can, I've also noticed like with my kids, they're almost 15 and 13 now. And like I've noticed over the years of cooking with my kids in the kitchen, and they don't hang out forever and ever. I mean, it's
Of course.
5 minutes here, 10 minutes here, 20 minutes maybe on a really generous time, But I have noticed that those are moments where if Tove, our daughter, is dicing an onion for me or whatever, that's time where I can talk with her. And because she's doing something with her hands and she's engaged doing this, that's actually opened up conversations for us to talk about all kinds of stuff. Friends at school, or how are you doing in algebra or whatever. Like, it's actually created a little space to have conversations that may not have happened otherwise. And so
Yeah.
it's a simple place to even mentor, disciple your kids. And like for me, because I don't work with my hands, like I can't swing a hammer to save my life. I'm useless with stuff like that. But so I can't pass on certain skills to my daughter or my
Yeah.
son. I can pass on this. And so I can show them how to work in the kitchen effectively. And that is something they'll carry with them. So those are some practical
Absolutely.
things just about like being a husband and a dad that I found the kitchen has been a useful place to not just make food, but like memories and like even disciple my kids, you know?
Yeah, and even going back to the thing you mentioned about like the DoorDash, Uber Eats, like
Yeah.
the rushed culture of eating and
Mhm.
finding moments for the family to get margin together and just to to unplug. The phone's
Yeah.
always on, the TV's always on, like you meant politics is just crazy, right? Like everything is just sort of infiltrating and
Yeah.
taking up space. And it feels a little bit like they have dominion over us in some ways in the attention economy. Like we are being harvested at just at a rapid rate. And so cooking
Yep.
is sort of this like reconnection to this ancient method
Mhm.
of living, which it feels weird to say, but it does, now with Chinese food getting delivered to your front door, it does feel like that. And you've got a moment to slow down with your children and your wife and be able to enjoy one another's company and go, hey, we're going to unplug. We have that responsibility to facilitate that environment for them because now that's got to be protected time.
There you go.
We're fighting, in some ways, we're fighting battles that, generations ago, they didn't have to fight because they didn't
Yeah.
have these cell phones and
Yeah.
televisions
20
infiltrating all
years
the time.
ago, they weren't thinking about this, 30
Yeah.
years ago, you weren't thinking about this, but now it's like, okay, so first you prioritize it and go, this is going to be a priority. I'm going to cook and I'm going to spend time with my family. Like,
Hmm.
okay, so I've made that decision first
Hmm.
and not just think, oh, that would be nice if I got around to it. It's like, well, just make the decision. Like, this is a priority. I'm just going to do this, in the same
Come
way
on.
like, with going to the gym or getting to bed on time or getting up early and all these other disciplines that we have. It's like, I'm going to build this in and I'm going to make sure that I just kind of create this kind of habit and rhythm and return to this every day, not just once in a while. Like, all right, well, it's Christmas. I guess we better all like get in here and cook together or whatever. It's like you can
Yeah.
actually do this
All the
consistently.
time.
Yeah.
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 And, like, I think just on a side note, like the fact that I could get sushi to my house in Seattle in like 34 minutes is mind boggling.
Yes.
Like, you know what I'm saying? Like that is shocking from like a world-renowned sushi chef, whatever they call. And I'm just like, how is that? Or I can get Thai food or tacos delivered to my. And so like that is in some ways a spiritual battle to say like, for my waistline, for my physical health, and for the stewardship of my time and energy and attention to my children. Like I've got to go and my wallet, like
Yes.
not even discussing that. Like it's coming from all sides. Oh man,
It
it's
is.
hitting us.
It
It
is.
is.
And there is something about like foregoing the convenience of Uber Eats for the sake of going, I know this is going to take me a little extra time to stop by the grocery and take extra time to cook this,
Yeah.
whatever. Like, but again, it's making that the priority and going ahead. I've already decided I'm not the Uber Eats dad, like in the sense of
Yeah.
like, I'm just not hitting an app every night to take care of my, like, I'm going to
Mhm.
do this. I'm going to participate, and
Come on.
yeah, yeah, so it is kind of
I
like what
love
you're
that.
saying. It is something to be resisted some in our society.
That's really good, man.
Yeah. Even though
Well,
like I'm
man,
not anti Uber Eats totally, but I
no.
also
Yeah.
it's in my opinion, it's like that probably shouldn't be the norm.
Yeah. No, like, yeah, we're not bashing Uber Eats or DoorDash. It's not that you should never do that, but it's just it is like, and it sucks to think about everything like a spiritual battle, but in a sense, you make time for and for what what you make time for what you want to do. And
Yeah.
if this is something that is valuable to you, if you spend time making time in the morning to read scripture or to
Yeah.
pray, it's a
Yeah.
spiritual discipline to say community and fellowship and worship with my family over meals. Like that to me feels like low hanging fruit in
Yeah.
terms of someone's spiritual life and development.
Yes. Yep. That's it. That's
Yeah,
it. Just like going to
exactly.
the gym or anything else. Yep.
We got to do this again soon, man. This
Yeah.
was fun.
I'm down.
Yeah.
I'm definitely down.
So everyone, Alex Early, a pastor at Redemption Church in Seattle, he wrote the cookbook / theology book, Among the Pots and Pans: Connect with God, Love Your Neighbor, Nourish Community Through Art of Cooking. I'm going to put the link in the show notes. But Alex, where can people find you if they want to know more?
Yeah. I'm on Instagram at Alex Early, or yeah, that's probably the easiest spot.
Cool.
Kind of where everybody is.
Awesome. All right, man. Thanks for being on with us.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.